Thank you, Ada. Welcome, everybody. My name is Elizabeth Pena. I'm the director of the Center for the Arts and Religion and the Doug Adams Gallery here at the Graduate Theological Union. And welcome to tonight's panel discussion, HIV/AIDS Ministry, Past and Present. This panel is inspired by our exhibition, Afterlife, which explores themes of death, community, and love through the work of artists Ed Aulerich-Sugai and Mark Mitchell, both of whom were affected by HIV/AIDS. We had planned this event for March, but we had to cancel when we were hit with our very own pandemic. So after that, the panelists, who you'll meet soon, were more determined than ever before to have this discussion. It took on a new resonance. And so we're thrilled that they were able to make time to be with us today. Unfortunately, not sitting in our gallery surrounded by the art, but here in the world of Zoom. But thank you, I'm grateful to them all for being here. This event is co-sponsored by the Center for LGBTQ and Gender Studies, also known as CLGS, at the Pacific School of Religion. It's also part of the worldwide virtual festival called Reimagine Life, Loss, and Love, that's organized by a nonprofit that's called Reimagine End of Life. So to get started, it is my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Dr. Bernie Schlager. Bernie has been affiliated with the Center for LGBTQ and Gender Studies since it was founded some 20 years ago. And now he's the executive director of that organization. So Bernie will serve as our moderator tonight, and I'm thrilled to pass it on to you, Bernie.
Thank you, Elizabeth. CLGS was founded, as Elizabeth mentioned, 20 years ago. Next year, we celebrate our 20th anniversary. And we are a center for research, education, advocacy, and community building for LGBTQ people of faith, spirituality, our families, and allies. And again, as Elizabeth mentioned, we are a program unit of Pacific School of Religion, which is in turn a member of the Graduate Theological Union, an interreligious studies center, internationally renowned for the depth and scope of religious and spiritual traditions. I am thrilled to welcome our panelists here this evening. I will have a brief introduction for each of them, and then Elizabeth will show us a brief video clip of the exhibition. And once again, when we planned this several months ago, we had no idea, how could we, that we would be living in this time of pandemic again. And I want to express my deep appreciation to our panelists for joining us today. After that video of the exhibition, we'll have about an hour of discussion between our four distinguished panelists, and then we will open it up for question and answer. So you can use that Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, attendees, and start logging your questions, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. I'm also thrilled to welcome each and every one of you who is here attending this co-sponsored CARE CLGS event. So let me provide some brief introductions of our panelists, and I will start with, excuse me, Yvette Flunder. Reverend Dr. Flunder was consecrated presiding bishop of the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries in 2003. And the fellowship is a multi-denominational coalition of over 100 primarily African-American Christian leaders and laity. Reverend Dr. Flunder is on the board of Star King School for the Ministry in Berkeley, California, and Demos, and has taught at many theological schools, I'm happy to say, including Pacific School of Religion. Bishop is a graduate of the Certificate of Ministry and Master of Arts program at PSR and received their Doctor of Ministry from San Francisco Theological Seminary. Welcome, Bishop. We're really pleased to have you with us. Next, I would like to introduce Rabbi Jane Litman. In 1984, Jane Rachel Litman was admitted to the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College as the first openly queer person to study for the rabbinate. Since ordination, Rabbi Litman served LGBTQ outreach congregation Kol Simcha and the congregation Shahar Zahab. Rabbi Litman is widely published in the fields of Jewish feminism, trans and queer theory, and is co-editor of the award-winning Life Cycles series. Rabbi Litman currently staffs the Jewish Roundtable for CLGS and is Rabbi of the Chico Havurah, a diverse and welcoming community. Welcome, Rabbi Litman. Next, I am pleased to present the Reverend Elder Jim Mitulski. Reverend Elder Mitulski has been pastor of United Church of Christ, Metropolitan Community Church, Disciples of Christ, and the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries congregations since 1983, including a 15-year tenure as pastor of Metropolitan Community Church, MCC San Francisco. He currently serves as pastor of Island United Church, UCC in Foster City, California. He has degrees from Columbia University, Pacific School of Religion, Harvard Divinity School, and was awarded an honorary doctorate from Starr King School for the Ministry for his work as an AIDS liberation theologian. Jim has been living with AIDS for 25 years. Welcome, Jim. We're pleased to have you with us. Last but not least, the Reverend Dr. Stephen Tierney is a priest in the Soto Zen tradition and has worked as a psychotherapist and health justice advocate at the intersection of addiction, HIV, and healing for 4 decades. He is Professor Emeritus at the California Institute of Integral Studies, CIIS, and also serves as Clinical Director at Seeds of Awareness here in Oakland, California. Reverend Dr. Stephen Tierney, welcome. We're really pleased to have you with us. I will now turn it over to Elizabeth, who will, or maybe Lydia, who will show us a brief video of the exhibition.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Pena, and I'm the director of the Center for the Arts and Religion in the Doug Adams Gallery at the GTU. This exhibition was guest curated by Aulerich-Sugai, and it features the work of 2 artists, Aulerich-Sugai and Mark Mitchell, both of whom were affected by HIV/AIDS and whose work reflects related themes. So let's take a look.
I'm Aulerich-Sugai. I'm the guest curator of Afterlife. A year ago, when I started planning the exhibition, I could not imagine how poignant its theme would be now at the time when we're living through the coronavirus pandemic. Mark Mitchell and Aulerich-Sugai, 2 artists in this exhibition, lived through another pandemic. They lived through the HIV/AIDS crisis. One of them, Aulerich-Sugai, unfortunately passed away from AIDS-related complications. In both cases, the artist's work was profoundly changed by the radical acts of love. Mark Mitchell survived the AIDS epidemic. He chose to express his gratitude by a radical, unusual gesture. A dressmaker and a costumer by trade. In 2013, he created a series of burial garments that were meant for the ones he held dear to his heart. They were exquisite, multi-layered burial garments that were made for each individual, and his friends modeled this ensembles at performance at the opening of the exhibition at the Fry Art Museum in 2013.
Made of beautiful silks and other fine materials, the detail is exquisite. For example, in the sleeves of this jacket, Mitchell has stitched these beautiful birds.
In this exhibition, we're showing these garments to kind of the separate elements so that you could see the way that they're constructed as burial garments. So for instance, the gowns have openings in the back as if to dress a body. The booties, the footwear, has embroidery on the soles, and some of the garments, jackets, only have sleeves and they don't really close in the back at all.
We have displayed these works floating from the ceiling, showcasing their ethereal quality. With each element, each gown, each tunic, Mitchell's care and tenderness for his friends comes through. He reminds us of the importance of recognizing, thanking, and honoring our friends and family while we are still together on earth.
Ed Aulerich-Sugai was an Asian American artist who spent most of his adult life in San Francisco. He left many series of works on paper and on canvas, as well as journals. These bodies of work, especially those that were written and painted in the last 7 years of his life, constitute a very unique chronicle of living with AIDS and HIV. Series of works called Figures in this exhibition was painted at the end of his life when his body was becoming more and more fragile. He invited models into his studio and painted this sort of nude, admiring their sort of vitality, their healthy bodies, as if he was living through them vicariously.
Some of the paintings, like this one, represent grief, and you see that these floating figures with downcast expressions and clasped hands. In these works, Ed is mourning friends who died, and this is at a time when people were dying from HIV/AIDS at astronomical rates.
The paintings that resulted really show these bodies are almost translucent, semi-transparent, suspended, sort of ascending maybe. They're suspended between life and death.
Other works, like this one, are more hopeful. Aulerich-Sugai was suffering, so he painted the luminous, upward floating, healthy bodies, wishing and willing himself toward health.
Ed Ulrich's former partners, those who helped him at the end of his life, the ones who loved him and held him, made a promise they would share his work with the rest of the world. And 25 years since his passing, they've come together to honor his life and his work and his legacy.
The art and afterlife connects us past and present. It expresses our fear and our worry, and it offers some solace and light. I encourage you to take some time to visit the exhibition, for now online only, and find out why we turn to art when, to quote Wordsworth, the world is too much with us.
Thank you, Elizabeth and Lydia, for bringing this beautiful art, not only to Holy Hill, but more importantly to the virtual world. It's very powerful. It's rare that I'll speak in the first person, when I have asked folks to serve on a panel where each and every person says yes. And that is the wonderful situation we are in today. And as an opening question, I would like to ask our panelists a double question, and you can go with it where you will. Why you agreed to speak on this panel, recognizing each of you has decades of experience in spiritual work and ministry with people living with HIV and AIDS. So let me put that question out there. Why did you say yes?
I can start. I think I had spent a number of years doing health advocacy and advocacy on behalf of gay and lesbian youth, and then right from the beginning, HIV advocacy. And what I knew was that I was between faith experiences, because I had not found in the faith of my childhood the kind of compassion and care that one would hope to find. And what I think about is a poem, I'll read a couple sentences of a poem by Naomi Shihab Nye. Before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things. Feel the future dissolve in a moment like salt in a weakened broth. What you held in your hand, what you counted carefully saved, all this must go, so you know how desolate the landscape can be between the regions of kindness. And so I found my way to a Buddhist practice as I was an HIV activist. because it made sense for me and for people who thought and experienced the way I did, to be in a place that I could experience as a faith, a philosophy of compassion and wisdom and kindness. They famously asked the Dalai Lama what his religion was, and he said kindness. And so that's an important thing for me. And even before COVID, I agreed to come to this because back in the day, the way people were cared for and the way people died and the way people's families were honored was by community people doing it. Jim and Jane and Yvette out there a long time, providing the kind of care that the medical establishment couldn't yet provide and the political and social justice, the social service environments would not provide. And so for me, when I looked at the work of Mark Mitchell, both artists stunning, but the work of Mark Mitchell, and what a beautiful thing to think about people as they come to the end, being cared for and held and dressed beautifully to honor the lives they lived and every bit of it, the lives they lived and the way they passed. So it just seemed like a powerful opportunity, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. But I was thinking when I said yes, that this was a panel of folks who had lived through that, lived and are living through the first virus and are now seeing the same thing as people talk about returning to normal. And we have, you know, a virus that has taken just about 100,000 human lives, somebody's brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers, and people keep saying, let's go back to normal. And then we see that, you know, by about double the impact on communities of color is what normal got us in this particular environment. And children, 1 in 5 children will go to bed hungry tonight because of COVID and a system of food justice that's not appropriate. So I came to be on this panel because we learned some lessons. We have learned some lessons. We need to teach those lessons again. And this seemed like an ideal group of people to teach with for the evening and to call everyone to action around health justice, food justice, and kindness.
Thank you, Stephen. Any other panelists want to weigh in?
I'd be happy to share.
Jim. Thank you.
Is that Jim's voice?
No.
You go ahead, brother. I'll come behind you.
Well, all right. I can say I simply said yes because I never say no to Pacific School of Religion, my alma mater, and I'm true to my school. More importantly, and that's partly out of loyalty for the groundbreaking and pioneering theological work that Pacific School of Religion did when no one else was interested. I also said yes because what a cool panel. I love every single one of these people and what they think, what they've been through. We've been through something together. And I think that what we earned and learned now is a gift that we can bring into the present, that in the past, people weren't even interested in what people like us thought. But now we really have a gift to talk about what it takes to survive, what it takes to navigate, what it takes to find meaning in the midst of great suffering, like we're experiencing right now with the pandemic. I said yes because it's a theological interest to me, the meaning of suffering. It's of spiritual interest to me. It's because of AIDS that I came to believe in the afterlife in a very clear way, and in the healing of the body and of the resurrection to eternal life, to use Orthodox language. It's political for me. Act up, fight back, fight AIDS. You know, I never met a protest I didn't like. And when you're doing an AIDS protest, you are doing a protest about protesting racism and sexism and xenophobia and who has access to healthcare. It's a comprehensive approach to challenging the way things are. And I think I said yes also because AIDS is not over. And I feel like I'm losing my mind half the time, which is quite possible, but because we proceed as if there was an historical period, and there was, you could periodize pre-protease and post-protease, though when not everyone has access to protease, pre-protease is still the present, right? Or medication, let's put it that way. And I feel like AIDS is still happening. You know, 35 million people died of it. There are more people now than ever before in the United States, just to pick one place, who are HIV positive or who have HIV. Less funding, less focus, less interest, all about who has it, right? In the past, it was gay. In the present, it's African American and Latino. It's men and women. It's the stigmatized. And I took a class at Harvard School of Public Health some years ago with Jonathan Mann, who was then the director of the World Health Organization response to AIDS. He said, AIDS, if you take the AIDS virus and sprinkle it on a map, it will show you everywhere there is inequity. And that's what my whole life has been about, challenging inequity through religion. Religion, which was the source of the oppression, Christianity, which is responsible for the spread of AIDS, and also Christianity, in my case, that's a key to liberation. So those are some of the reasons. But really, I couldn't say no to this group of panelists. So thanks.
That's right. There are several things that I've already heard. And because we are like spirits in so many ways, I am here for many of the same reasons that my colleagues are here tonight. But a couple of things came to my mind because there are many parallels for me from my 30 plus years of HIV work that causes the conversation about HIV and AIDS and COVID-19 to really connect in my spirit and in my mind, because I am feeling some of the same emotions, some of the same concerns. I find myself going back to sermons I haven't preached in 20 years and finding that they are once again vital in this time with very few changes, frankly, in truth. And I remember the shift when AIDS shifted from GRID to AIDS, when it lost the handle of being the gay-related immune deficiency disease. However, it still had that handle in the minds of people. I am listening to the parallels between the wrath of God conversations, the end time apocalyptic eschatology conversations that remind me very much. The four horses of the apocalypse, they're back again. And all of the conversations about the angry God who has created this leader for us to lead us out of perdition and into holiness and right living, who is the current occupant of the White House. And it is amazing to me, amazing how redundant and repetitious these realities are. So there are many parallels. The virus that causes AIDS changed names, it didn't change spirits, because folks did not know then that it was an equal opportunity virus. Some folks still don't know because they don't travel the continent of Africa. They don't understand what happened in Asia. They're not aware that the virus doesn't stop and ask your sexual orientation. Just like COVID-19 does not stop and ask what your race is and what is going on. And I'm also seeing an uprising of patriarchy, an uprising of white supremacy, an uprising of many of the things that were parallel. And you would think, inasmuch as humankind has experienced pandemics over and over and over again, over and over, and for all intents and purposes, all the way as far back as we know, we tend to have the same basic reactions. Who to blame? Who is the divine angry with? Who can we kill to put an end to this? Who is better? Who is lesser? And my incredible prayer, I'm sure, is the same as yours, that this time, in some way, we can reflect on what it is that is happening and decide as humankind that we will act differently than the ways that we have acted before. Now, I say it with great hope while I'm watching all these AR-15s showing up at places of the people's houses, let's put it that way, state houses and houses that belong to cities and houses that belong to God. It is amazing to me what it is, but it is so repetitious. It is so repetitious. And my prayer is that somehow conversations like this and the work that we have done in the past will inform the work that we are doing now. I want to see us somehow or other beat our swords into plowshares and study war no more. That is my desire. So I'm back at it. Good to see y'all. I was going to retire. I made a decision. I was on my way to retirement. And here we go. So anyway, blessings.
Thank you, Bishop.
Well, when I got asked, I want to echo my colleagues because it's certainly a group of very esteemed and deep people whom I've known for a long time. But my personal story is that a couple years ago, a friend of mine who was a hospice chaplain, a hospice rabbi, retired, and the hospice had a very hard time finding a rabbi to do her work. And she called me up and she said, would you be willing just to cover for me for a couple shifts a week, just 2 shifts a week? And I was very reluctant to do that because frankly, by 1990, no, about 2000, by 2000, I was really sick of burying people. I was really tired of funerals. I couldn't even count the number of funerals I had done. I had one week where I buried 15 people, none above the age of 40. And I just couldn't imagine going back into an environment where I would be doing funerals again. But you know, when somebody asks, you say yes. And so I started doing it, and I found that though my AIDS chaplains, my AIDS pastoral work was informing me, I had transformed. I had grown as a person in a certain way, and that I was now able to deal with things that I really couldn't deal with 20 years ago. That I mean, I dealt with because we had to, but I didn't have the depth of reintegrating. This helped me reintegrate those experiences and understand better how to be a good hospice chaplain. And I found surprisingly that I could do hospice work. You know, the big difference is I almost never have a tragedy in hospice work. It's almost all people in their 80s, 90s, 100. I have more patients, many times more patients over the age of 100 than I do below the age of 70. And so, but I found that the death, it has a quality that is similar, whether it's tragic, whether it's in its time, whatever it is. And the AIDS crisis, which is, I thought, really well put, is still ongoing. It's certainly not over. Familiarized me with death in a way that is just in my whole soul. I found the artwork that I went and looked at, to see if I want to be on the panel, deeply moving. As Mark Mitchell said in an interview, that the whole period, was a horror show. Like it was though, he's a costume designer, and so he looked at it in a certain way, in a dramatic way, and it was the genre was horror, and that you would show up and who would be dead today and how would they look, and somebody who had seen 6 months ago who looked great was now at death's door. And so I wanted to come and talk about how I understood that horror show differently now, and also about the inequity that's going on still in terms of AIDS, and about some of the issues about our society, American society, and capitalism and exploitation of the poor and of the other, of those Black and brown people. And all of those seemed very present. And then, you know, as everybody said, COVID hit. And suddenly my ministry is filled with people who are HIV positive, who are re-experiencing trauma, and who are deeply, deeply re-traumatized by this pandemic. I got a letter from a friend of mine who used to be a congregant, who, when the New York Times came out with its front page of 100,000 deaths from COVID, wrote me and said, when there were 100,000 deaths from AIDS, it didn't make the front page of the New York Times. It was like a box on page 4. And so both the similarities of COVID, but the differences are very important for all of us to note. And I look forward to us doing that now.
Thank you, Rabbi Jane. You've led us into another question, and that is, some of you have mentioned it, but let me open this up and say, how does the artwork from this exhibit speak to you? You've seen it, I know, before, and we saw a very powerful snippet just now.
I'll start. And the artwork is different from each other. It's a great pairing to me, but they touch on things that are really important to me. One is that during HIV/AIDS, we learned to affirm the beauty of the human body, of sexuality, that it's a good thing. And the Aulerich-Sugai's ascending bodies, which were erotic and beautiful, reminded me that at the time that people died, sometimes it was hard to think of this moment of transformation, which is what I think of it as a moment of beauty, though it was spiritually always that for me, because the reality of their human suffering and the decaying body and the circumstances often were degrading, frankly. This was like a re-imaging of that to me, the ascending joy, right? I think that's what several of them are called. And I often thought spiritually, this is what's happening, even though it doesn't look like this in the carnal world. And so it was a restoration to me, those images. The funeral wear reminded me, as was a Christian, I think of going to heaven as the marriage supper of the Lamb. And even though they were funeral garments, they had a certain kind of wedding festivity to it. And they were beautiful in their details. When I saw the birds, the image of the birds embroidered into some of the sleeves, that made me cry. It's making me cry right now, because everyone deserves to be seen in that way as royal in their death. I used to do a lot of funerals for the California Mortuary College, which was near my church in San Francisco. So it was where all the indigent, that was the word they used, people who died without money, basically, funerals were. So people without money, the deal was the mortuary college would do the funeral as a sort of an learning opportunity for the students, right? Then there would be a viewing, and then there would be a cremation. But for the 3 hours of the viewing, I saw people really bring beautiful clothing, things that were meaningful to them. And it reminded me of all those hundreds of people, literally, whose funerals I did, whose names were not known because they were so-called indigent. And to see these beautiful bridal, but also funeral garments as if for royalty was another kind of restoration for me. Elizabeth asked in her video that we saw, some of us saw, why is it we turn to art at times like these? Because art heals, even when religion fails. Now I've tried to make religion not fail, but I have to say, you know, one of my hashtags is poetry is my religion, because sometimes art will do what nothing else can do. And I felt restored, literally, by both of these. They're different from each other, but both art pieces.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim, my brother. So the death shrouds in particular created a visual comparison for me, particularly because I serve in this current epidemic as well, COVID-19. And my COVID-19 experience in the African-American community has denied families the ability to customarily gather as family and friends to both celebrate and mourn. And that is huge in the African-American community. I can remember when one of my young men, when we were over in the Castro, when City of Refuge was in that neighborhood, one of our young men who died from complications to HIV, his mother got a white hearse. She got 3 or 4 white limousines. And then we got behind the limousines in a car train. It must have been about maybe 75 cars. And we drove to the family home all the way in East Bay. We across the bridge. We drove to the church where he was raised. We drove to some spots that he used to go to. And then finally, we went to the cemetery. And then after the cemetery, we all went to the reserved hall for dinner. It took us all day. But the reason that it was important that it happened is because this family was intent on celebrating his life. And we were intent in helping them celebrate his life. What is so painfully difficult in watching this reality in COVID-19, particularly again in our community, and I know it's true in other communities, but I say that because of how incredibly important burying our people was and is. So to comfort the family and to honor the dead, HIV also stole from many the ability to celebrate great lives because they were taken in the atmosphere of fear and stigma and bad religion. There's a real corollary for me between these realities. And death is such a tender time. And I can remember up close, my former husband, my daughter's father. We were both same gender loving when we married. I think we were trying to cancel each other out. You know, we were in the Pentecostal church and we were both trying to get ourselves saved again, I think. But anyway, when we did get married, the important thing that I wanted to leave with you today is that he became HIV positive. I frankly do not know, as an aside, why I am not HIV positive or why my daughter is not. And I'm certainly not going to say by the grace of God, because it suggests that people who are HIV positive have not enjoyed the grace of God. But I can say to you that he was HIV positive. And to get to the point that I want to share, when he was dying and he was at the hospice where he was, and family would come and visit him, when it was clear that he was imminently terminal, and we talked about planning his funeral, because of the denomination that we were a part of, his family did not want him to have a public ceremony. And so they brought a chaplain in who said some things about him. The family said some things about him, and that was the end of his celebration of life. And he lived a very vibrant life. And it saddened me that he had such a poor opportunity to be celebrated openly by his community. There is a parallel here for me in terms of what is happening in COVID-19 and what is happening in so many ways with HIV. The stigma and the idea, and then I'll leave this with you, how the artwork speaks to me, because the shrouds carefully made were very much like how carefully people prepared funerals for us. But I will leave this with you. There is also a great sadness and a bereavement in the African-American community, because one of the largest denominations that is a part of Black Pentecostalism, the Church of God in Christ, suffered an incredible number of deaths from this virus. an incredible number. They lost 30 of their bishops. And I need for that to rest with you just for a minute, because it's something that the news won't talk a lot about. But if you go and look for the Church of God in Christ, you'll find out, and not just bishops, but superintendents and women's department leaders and choir members. They lost hundreds of people who died because they were all going to the same conferences together during a certain time when the virus was moving from person to person. And here is the pain of it, which I see this artist seeking hope and healing and in the dying process at the same time. The connection for me is that they had a big prayer and a big fast and asked God to heal the people who are sick, to heal the country, to heal the world, to heal the nations of this virus. They fasted and they prayed, and people died anyway. And what that has a tendency to suggest is that God is angry with us. And so now I'm hearing this conversation that this happened to us because we need to get the sin out of our church. And I think you know what I'm talking about. It's like such a deja vu, a coming around. The absence of celebration, the presence of lamentation. The absence of celebration, the presence of lamentation. But here this young man was able to bring both of those things together in one place. Lamentation in the shrouds, celebration in the beautiful form of bodies. I pray that we will do better coming out of this virus. So that's my reflection.
I can't count the number of guys who came to me and said, I'm never going to have a wedding. I'm never going to have a wedding. And so my funeral will be my wedding. And planned meticulous funerals, like a wedding, talking about who do I want to speak? Who do I want to invite? And the shrouds really did remind me of that very much, about what do I want to wear? A lot of emphasis on what am I going to wear to my eternal life. And there's also a video that is an interview with Mark Mitchell that I hope you'll all see, which shows, there was just a brief part in the video we saw of the opening in which Mark's friends are laid out in these shrouds, and their hair is brushed and put to, made beautiful, and they're, washed and taken care of. And in Jewish tradition, we wash and prepare bodies communally. It's a very sad thing that during COVID, we are unable to do that. Though I had a really odd experience last week, and a woman who died here in the Bay Area and wants to be buried in Cheyenne, Wyoming. I called up Cheyenne to talk about what they do, and they are still doing all the preparation that is against, not being able to be done here where there's more COVID. And so that all of that, the preparation, the care, and the thought of what goes into making a funeral like a wedding. A lot of times, back in the day, coming out was the same phone call as I'm dying. I'm dying of AIDS, and I'm dying because I'm gay. And it's so hard in this world, in our current world, to understand what that world was like. It's just amazing. I could not have imagined in 1989 and 1992 that gay people would be getting married and characters on TV shows, and not dark tragedies, but actual lovely comedies, and that there would be a pretty good normalization of gay life, which sometimes has its downside, but is generally a good thing. But in those days, not. And AIDS, a lot of men joined my synagogue in order to die there, in order to have a community to die with, and in order to be with people, to look at the other artwork, the artwork of the bodies of being people who weren't dying, and to join a community in which there were, mostly women and, the lesbian babies in those days, the babies of women who were the way that gay men, who were more of the ones who were dying, could have families in which there would be life after they were gone, and that they could devote themselves both. I think the pairing of the art is amazing, because it's both the shrouds and the glory of the ascending bodies, so that there was a knitting together in the building of community. And this is when, up until AIDS, I really think the lesbian community and the gay male community were very separate, and AIDS brought us together, and brought us together as a one community that could take care of each other. And the same way those art pieces blend with each other, I think, to me, they speak of the community that was formed, a community of caring and a community of political advocacy in response to AIDS.
Thank you, Rabbi Jane.
Yeah, I think we all in our various faith traditions understand life cycle, that there is a beginning, there is a growth period, and there's an end. And what's unique about these viruses of old and new, both current but new, is the interruption that it makes, that things aren't going the way we hoped they would go, and people aren't living and dying the way that we would hope that they would. And as Yvette mentioned, for all of us, my 95-year-old mother died in February, just before this started. So I had a chance to go to Michigan and be with her, and then go back to Michigan and be with the family for the funeral. And 2 weeks later, friends of mine that were having the same experience with COVID were unable to do any of that. And so I think the reason that I liked this art goes to that very idea that the others have mentioned. So I'll just be very brief, that we have beauty in death and beauty in life. The burial garments and the beautiful ascending figures. And that's true, no matter what the bodies look like as people go. They are the beauty of that person, the whole of their life. And they are someone's children and someone's grandchildren. And coming behind us we will be the ancestors for the next generation. And so how we're judged in terms of accepting our responsibility for compassion and care and political activism will be really important. And, again, I say that, we keep talking about in cycles that we hear the news people saying return to normal or a new normal. And just recently they've started saying living with COVID. We were all around when we insisted that people stop talking about AIDS victims and started talking about people living with HIV, to honor the life and the vitality and the need for compassion and kindness. And I think that's what we're experiencing again. And every time I hear that president in the White House, that person talking about wanting to open the economy, or there was a tragic young man on the news on the weekend at one of those rallies that had a t-shirt on that said selfish but proud, and he was wrapped in an American flag. And so I think that it's that disruption of basic kindness and basic compassion that we're really seeing again, as we saw last time. And I think we have lessons that we learned, and lessons are that we have to be kind to one another on an individual basis, and that we have to absolutely demand that the systems that allowed this to happen again not be allowed to do it one more time in our lifetimes or after.
Thank you, Reverend Dr. Stephen. I'm mindful of the fact that with the four of you, not to sound too intimidating, but we have a century and a half of experience in ministering with people living with HIV/AIDS. And as we are now in this new pandemic, recognizing, of course, there are still many people living with HIV and AIDS. There are people dying today from complications related to HIV illness. We've been exposed to this beautiful art, and we are with one another. So my question is, and I understand you don't want to answer this, are there any stories that come to your mind or thoughts that have been sparked by the brief conversation we've had so far together? From your ministry, past, present?
I'll jump in quickly. That I think, you know, we've had some good news in HIV care recently about drugs that might be working, and that's a wonderful thing. And one of the things that friends of mine who are scientists and researchers say is that all of the money is now being pulled away to deal with COVID because it's up, and it's up because it, you know, is affecting the election. Frankly, is one of the reasons it's up. And certainly we want to be mindful of the 100,000 people and the million people who have been infected. But I think we cannot let, which is so wonderful to be having this particular panel and this art presentation at this time, to really bond the two. The need to care compassionately for people and their families is the same in HIV care as it is in COVID-19 care, as it is in the isolation caused by shelter in place and the increased suicide rates also impacting different communities differently. So we have to not allow the importance of COVID to take resources away from the importance of the millions of people who have lost loved ones to HIV. We can't let it be either or. We can't let them otherize people with HIV once again. We have to say that we are all humanity, and we're not going to let that happen. And we preach that, and our congregations and sanghas and groups demand that. And I think that that's the kind of ministry that all of us are really proud to be part of.
Thank you, Stephen.
It seems to me that the COVID pandemic has really torn the tattered bandage off the wound of white supremacy, and that you have to be a fool not to be able to see what's going on at this point in capitalism and profiteering, the extraordinary level, especially in this country, of profiteering that is going on. And it does remind me of the epidemic of AIDS, in that there was profiteering then, there was scapegoating, there was total inequity between who got it and who got treated and how, and the false information, propaganda that and I think for Americans it was such those gay people and those sex workers and those IV drug users. It was such an othering that it didn't for us it did. It showed me the inequity, but I think for most Americans it didn't. But COVID now, you have to be, as openly able to say I'm selfish and proud of it in order not to see what's going on at this point. And so I am hopeful that what COVID will do is it will open up people's eyes to understand what's been going on all along, that since AIDS and before, since the founding of this country, in this country and throughout the world, of how inequity and white supremacy are destroying our world.
I became involved. Can I go? Yeah. Have I been set free to speak? I became involved, to your question, Dr. Bernie, I became involved around HIV when there were 3 or 4 people dying a week in our congregation. I am a Methodist-Baptist, as you know that, and in that reality, and a gospel music singer, gospel music artist. And in my communities, there were a number of people who started to die. That's the thing that I most need to say. And when the dying was happening so rapidly and painfully difficult, I remember having a really major depression. I was burying too many friends and colleagues and people who were uncertain about their sexuality and their spirituality. And I remember, in my truth, what launched me into HIV work was a combination of bourbon and jazz. And let me tell you what happened to me. I was throwing myself a complete pity party. I was all by myself and I was crying and I was all upset and I was broken and I felt hopeless and helpless in the epidemic. And so I turned all the lights off, poured myself a reasonably hefty glass of bourbon and turned on Donny Hathaway. You get to know Donny Hathaway. Okay, Layla Hathaway's daddy, as we say all the time. And he was singing a song called Giving Up Is Hard to Do When You Really Love Someone. Good old blues number. And so I wept and I cried and I was sitting in the dark and I was drinking the bourbon and listening to Donny Hathaway. And it was in that moment that the Spirit of God and good spoke to me and told me what I needed to do. It came in just a moment that I needed to do the work that we began to do in and around HIV. I saw it all panoramically, as though I was flying over it. I could see it. I was able to see it and understand it. And I saw it so clearly that I didn't even really ask why or how. I knew it would happen, and we became the first African-American church to have housing for people living with HIV, both in Oakland and San Francisco, some people in recovery. And it was an amazing beginning, and it went from there to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing. I saw it, and I thank God that I was able to see it, and thank God for Donny Hathaway. And for the departure, theologically, I got connected with Carlton Pearson, and one day we were watching the television, we were watching the deaths that were happening in Uganda and Rwanda, particularly Rwanda, and the Hutus and the Tutsis were killing one another horribly. You may know that 800,000 Rwandans were killed in about 3 months. That's an incredible number of people to die in a Holocaust in that way. And I was weeping and crying and watching the television, sitting with him, and I said, why won't God do something about this? This is Epiphany 2. And that was when the Spirit, what I believe to be the Spirit of God, spoke to me and said, and why won't you do something about it? And that began our work in East Africa. And we've been there ever since. But what is it that is my heart to you? My heart to you is that those beginnings came with an epiphany. And it came through bourbon, come on now. And it came through Donny Hathaway, and it came through television, so it won't always happen in the holy places. You know, God and good are well able to create a holy place just about anywhere. So it happened, and I believe that our epiphany, which in so many ways, in so many powerful ways, my precious sister, Rabbi Jane, just made very, very clear that we are going to have to speak truth to power again. We're going to have to, we're not babies anymore, but we're going to have to pull up our big boy pants and big girl pants and get out there again and speak truth to power again. We have a couple of really good rides left in us, and we are going to have to bring the voice of our experience and the voice of our knowing, our passion and our compassion again, to do something about this. We laid down in coffins in San Francisco years ago, didn't we, Jim? We laid down in coffins. We did. And now we are going to have to put up a fight for the heart of this country and the other countries who are taking their steps by watching us. That is going to have to be our task. We are going to have to go and use the experience that HIV and AIDS taught us. I thought we were gonna retire, but we ain't through yet. We've got to go back and we have got to use the experience and help our country and our nation get past the fact that we have a despot that has no real empathy for any of this, and be able to name that and say it boldly and suffer whatever consequences come with that, and see if we can once again bring the heart of good and God into these difficult situations. With gray hair, we got to do it. We got to do it this time. With what hair is left, Steve, we got to do what we got to do to get it done. I love you all. You know I do.
Thank you, Bishop Yvette.
I want to lift up two words to us: anger and activism.
Yes.
Because those are also things. We've talked a lot about death and dying and funerals, and those were political acts, but it was anger and activism also that got us through, and we have to muster it again. I really believe that. I've been reading this Adrienne Rich book about art and activism, and she said this: in the 1980s, AIDS catalyzed a new gay activism, outrage laced with mourning, mourning, mourning. And that's what we need to bring back. You know, I remember preaching at MCC San Francisco in 1986 or 87, you know, with my tattered old Bible, you know, with all the notes in it that are these are the AIDS stories. I've got each posted as an HIV story, right? But in 1986, when Prop 64 was on the ballot, it was a Lyndon LaRouche initiative to mandatory quarantine people with HIV in California. Some of you remember that. And people were really worried. We thought we would lose. We thought they would put us into prisons on Alameda, because that's what they were talking about doing. And this is one of those moments that and preachers here will get what I'm saying. Something came through me, not from me, right? And I said, they can't enforce a law we won't submit to. And it was not from me, I swear. It really did come through me. And as I said it, it was like electricity in the room. You know, it changed the mood from despair to anger. We were not going to let this happen to us. And I thought about the times through the AIDS years, as I think of them, when I've been pushed to breaking a law in order to make a change. You know, I'm a Catholic school, parochial school boy from Detroit, okay? We did not, I wore little bow ties and walked on, you know, in order all the time. That was how I was raised. Breaking rules did not come naturally to me. But love, passion, anger, loss, grief pushed me to break rules and break laws. In 95 or 96, when we gave out medical marijuana from MCC Church in the Castro, it was totally against the law, and we were warned we could lose our building and I could go to jail. And I'm not a brave person, really, but my grief and my anger wouldn't let me not break a law. You know, when we went, Bishop, to Zimbabwe 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago, I can't even keep track anymore. And I saw what happened when people observed American and European patent laws, which prevented medication that was life-saving and available in the United States, where I was from going to Zimbabwe, because no one could make a profit off it. And I saw, and you know, not to put too fine a point on it, not to give too many details, but we smuggled in medication that had been created in India, where they disregarded the American and European patent laws, so that babies, do you remember baby Anthony at Mother of Peace in Zimbabwe? Babies were dying in 2007, 2008, because they did not have access to medications that were available, but no one could make money off of. So we broke the law. We broke the law. And we need to break the law again if necessary, because if we don't come out of this COVID thing with universal health care for everyone as a human right and not a privilege, and abolish this ridiculous system of health insurance for profit, we will have failed. And I don't even believe in failure. You have to keep trying. But I do feel like we missed an opportunity through HIV to not come out of it with something better for healthcare than we got. And I'm appreciative of Obamacare, but I do want to say this: we need freaking free, universal healthcare for everyone, regardless of ability to pay. That's the gift that we bring from our HIV years into the COVID years, and we can't settle for less. Whatever it takes to make you angry, whatever it takes to make you break a law, whatever it takes to get you to use your body in protest. Why do we even let ICE take people from their homes? In my AIDS years, we wouldn't have let it happen. People who are undocumented are occupying the same place of stigma that people with AIDS occupied a generation earlier. And this is our opportunity. We're all alive, all four of us. We bring a witness. We lived through something in order to testify, I think right now, about how the future does not have to be a repeat of the past. So that's my exhortation for us today.
Thank you, Reverend Elder Jim. At this point, people who are attending and taking part with us, please use the Q&A box at the bottom for any questions. And I will ask one more question of our group. So rather than putting it in the chat box at the bottom, it'd be helpful to put it in the Q&A box. So a final question: as queer, Buddhist, Jewish, and Christian religious leaders, what reflections, invitations, challenges do you have to LGBTQ communities today with regard to our siblings living with HIV/AIDS and/or COVID-19 today? So big question. But as queer religious leaders, what are the challenges that you have for our LGBT communities?
I think there's something that we all have lived through and learned, and that we can teach, that we've all talked about. And one of the ways that I think we can teach that is to really bring a well of compassion and a well of wisdom and not engage in otherizing. The news media the last week or so has talked about thousands of people flocking to churches in a dangerous act, and hundreds of people going to water parks, and thousands of people going to the beaches. And it's an attempt to otherize and to blame somebody for the spread of COVID. And it's government malfeasance, and it's a lack of leadership. We need, through public health and through compassionate spiritual teachings, and in our own lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and straight communities, we need to say to folks, it's not about otherizing. This, we are all in this together, and we will survive it by taking care of each other and by continuing. In Buddhism, we call it skillful means, continuing to deliver the message in as many ways as we need to till everybody hears it. And so to be righteous anger, I absolutely agree with, and getting engaged in all of the kinds of things that all four of us have talked about, mandatory and necessary. But I think we want to be careful that anger goes in the right direction, and that what we extend to our brothers and sisters in all the communities of the country is compassion and skillful means to say, don't do things that are unsafe, because your life is worth it, and your family's lives are worth not doing that, and not allow it to turn into a culture war fomented by a lunatic in the White House.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Reverend Stephen. Bishop.
Well, yes, hallelujah. A couple of things. One is stigmatization. Self-stigmatization is suicide. It can happen quickly or it can happen slowly. And one of the things that I would say most to people right now is it's important to realize, visualize, actualize self-care. Let's start there. Let's start with deciding that no matter what comes down from the White House or any color house that's out there, that we will begin the active work of self-care. We'll fall for anything if we can't stand for something. And I think the most important thing is to stand for self-care. And stigmatization, suicide is the absence of self-care. So the work of helping many people to look to good in God is going to come from people who feel like they are in a good place with good and God, right? People who feel worthy are people who choose life. I used to work on teaching people about HIV, and I realized over time that I needed to teach them about how to choose life. Because you can get free from HIV and still have a partner that beats you up every day. So how do you choose to live? How do you choose life? It's important. And I think that that is something that we should share with whomever we can. And then theologically, if I can speak theologically just for a minute, I would say that HIV moved us to a place of these new terms that we began back in those days, radical inclusion, to be radically inclusive, and to have relentless hospitality and extravagant grace. We learned those things. We came up with those terms because we believed in a theology that meant no more gay closets. I would like to also believe that in this particular time, what I would want most to say to people in terms of what I have learned in my experience is that free people. Do whatever you need to do to get free. And then what will happen is that freedom will become a contagion. You'll start to surround yourself with people who will move toward that aura because you are a free person who practices self-care. And then in practicing self-care, you can encourage other people to practice self-care. And my folks said it in a song, but in slavery, they said, in slavery, that's where this one came from, that before I be a slave, I be buried in my grave and go home to my God and be free. You cannot enslave a person who will not have it. I think that the same is true in the hard justice work that we must do in the middle of this virus. We are going to have to encourage people to believe that because we are dealing with a completely insane set of circumstances, it does not have to be our new normal. We can act up and we can fight back. Let me say it again. We can act up and we can fight back. We won because we believed in ourselves. And I would pour that out now to those that hear us on this call today.
Thank you, Bishop.
Well, I would say to the queer community, don't let this divide us. I think what Bishop said is true, that we start, it's like circles of care. We start with self-care, and then we start with our community care, that we take care, we connect with each other, call your queer friends. This is very traumatizing to LGBTQ elders who live through the worst of the AIDS crisis, because it really brings up a lot of stuff. So don't be isolated. Even in your house, even if you're a vulnerable person, you can call up other people, and you can rabble-rouse on Zoom or on the phone. And then, something that gay people really understand well is speaking the truth. And so, we know what it means to be closeted, and also to be an authentic self. And part of what we can do now is, in this time of massive disinformation, is to tell the truth and keep it honest and keep it real. And so that's what we're going to do.
Thank you, Rabbi Jane.
I just want to say, don't give up on your spirituality. We all have plenty of reasons to either reject the religion or the a-religion of our childhood, or not. For myself, I was raised as a Catholic. I became a convinced Protestant Christian as an adult, which is inconceivable to my family. But what it was is Christianity on my own terms. Religion and spirituality was too important to hand over to the clowns in Rome, in my opinion. And it has kept me alive. And you know, whether you reclaim the religion of your youth or make a new religion or join with integrity a new tradition, don't give up on spirituality. And that's going to be, I know it's a elusive kind of word, but you know it when you're experiencing it. What gives you hope? What gives you meaning? You know, to me, it's, I am the resurrection and the life. That means I believe that there's a world to come. It also means I have a life to live right now. Resurrection means life before death, not just life after death. So I just want to toss that into the mix. Since we're a religious group of many paths, don't give up on religion. Don't leave it to people who exploit it. Reinvent it, reclaim it, refashion it, renovate. We're LGBT people. That's what we do, right? We make beauty. And so that's my pitch.
Thank you, Reverend Elder Jim. I'd like to turn to the Q&A. We have a question from Zebulon, and I'll read it here. Let's see. How do we deal with the fact that this pandemic in this country is being inflicted as a weapon? The absolute gall of YT people, especially who go into public spaces without masks, who call the cops on us as we move furniture, as we sit on our couches, as we play outside. I did not live through HIV/AIDS, but this seems different. They know they are killing us and they don't care. Thank you, Zeb.
Well, I want to say they knew they were killing us. Like, don't think that they knew. And in a certain way, it was worse because they not only knew they were killing us, but it was the unnameable murder, and that it was secret. It wasn't happening. You couldn't talk about it. It was not only murder, but it was erased murder. And that's what they're trying to do now. They are absolutely trying to do the same thing, which is to pretend that it is just, you know, let's go golfing. Like, this is not happening, but it is happening, and people are being murdered, and they're being murdered by COVID, and they're being murdered, you know, with COVID as the cover for murder. And I think, you know, what everybody here said about, you know, in those days, I remember sitting with a bunch of friends, and we were looking at what kind of red food coloring looked most like blood. And we made a vat of fake blood, and we went and we threw it on people. And we said, here's the blood. This is the blood. You're spattered with our blood. And we weren't nice. And so I do think, you know, what Reverend Stephen said about we being compassionate and kind. You can have much compassion and kindness, but you don't have to be nice.
All right, sister. You know, again, there's a lot of lessons. And here's one. I was talking to a young man who was living with HIV, who knew he was positive. And he told me that he was not going to use a barrier or practice safe sex because somebody gave it to him. And they were not open and honest with him. And so he was going to give it to other people because people were not open and honest with him. So I talked to him about the importance of the blood of the whole human family and how things can stop with you if you make a decision to practice safe sex, right? Now, simultaneously, there's a word that did go out and should go out to people who are making themselves vulnerable to people who think like this brother did, if you understand. There's an obligation, there's a responsibility on both ends of that transaction. The one who is living with HIV and the one who is not living with HIV, who is also not practicing safe sex, if you understand what I'm saying. There's an obligation on both ends. I think that in some ways the same is true in this present time that we're in, that there are people out there that are angry because things are not happening the way that they want them to, especially if they have historically been in power. They don't know anything else but being in power. They have never not been in power. I was in Mississippi for a number of years at the Church of God in Christ school down there. And a little boy who was 7 years or 8 years old or so saw me pass under an underpass. And he yelled out, "Hey, nigger." He couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old. He didn't come here knowing how to do that. He was trained to do that in the family that he was a part of. Now he's got to be untrained a little further down the line. I gave him some untrained in that day, if you can imagine, but he has to be untrained. But what is the heart of what I'm saying to you? I think that a lot of angry people who believe that they were supposed to be in charge of all things and things didn't work out are now being careless with their lives and they're being careless with ours. Now, I only have so much responsibility to help you with you being careless with your life. But I do know how to do the best I can, not to be careless with mine. And so I would say to people, do what you need to do to protect yourself in this current atmosphere. Like they tell you on the airplane when we used to fly them, they said, if my oxygen mask drops down, put yours on first, and then help the person who is next to you. You're helping them both by example, and you are saving your own life. That is the way we have to push back against the hatred. This hatred is, the underpinning of it is despair. And this despair is connected to the fact that folks believe that they were supposed to succeed in powerful ways. And they see you, Stephen, and they see you, Reverend Stephen, Reverend Jim, and they see you, Rabbi Jane, they see you, Dr. Bernie, and you all are all doing really, really well. And as far as they're concerned, you are not supposed to succeed. And so they don't mind coughing on you, and they don't mind spitting on you. In fact, they developed an effigy of their own governor and hung him up in a noose because he wouldn't open the bars and beaches. What kind of pain is that? And disappointment is that? The best possible thing I can do to show somebody like that they're wrong is for me to succeed. That's what I'm about doing. And then trying to see as many people around me as possible that I touch to also live well for however long we live, to live well. That's where my heart is about this.
Thank you, Bishop. I'd like to read a comment from Gideon. As a Kenyan African student privileged to sojourn around here during these unique times, my heart is shredded all the time as I observe all the selfishness and callousness that's so blatantly flaunted at most every opportunity. And I join Bishop Flunder's prayer that we will emerge a better species after it all. Thank you, Gideon. I want to take this moment to thank our panelists and provide space for any, I won't say a last word, additional comment. You've been wonderful. And again, I would like to thank Bishop Flunder, Reverend Stephen Tierney, Rabbi Jane Rachel Litman, Reverend Elder Jim Mitulski, Elizabeth, Pena, and Ala and Lydia, everybody for this CARE CLGS collaboration. Thank you, attendees, for being here. This will be recorded and it'll be posted both on the CARE panel, on the CARE website and on the CLGS website. So any closing words from any of our panelists? The last 2 words I want to leave with you and our attendees is thank you. And now I will go back behind the curtain.
I think just that, you know, the news media and so forth for the first couple of weeks of shelter in place kept talking about we're all in this together and we're stronger together. And you know, it's a shame that that became a tagline for commercial sales and all that stuff. But as Bishop Flunder just said, and Jane and Jim, that's exactly how we're going to win this. We're all in this together, and we are here to hold each other up. You know, we heard from a famous teacher whose name I'm just blanking on because it's the last minute, but they might forget what we said and they might forget what we did, but they will never forget how we made them feel. And so when people are suffering as much as they are, we need to let them know that our higher power, the Buddha's love, God's love, is with them, and that if they've lost way to that, we can help them find the way back to the path.
Thank you, Reverend Stephen.
I want to remind us the importance of solidarity. You know, we didn't get to this, I'm sure we would have. The increase in anti-Asian and anti-Asian American rhetoric, violence, discussion, it's, you know, modeled by our president talking about a Chinese virus, which is about as ridiculous as calling HIV a gay disease, has an impact. So, you know, let's just lift up the word solidarity.
Thank you, Jim. So thank you, everyone. And thank you to our fabulous tech support person, Ada. Thank you, Ada. And once again, thank you for joining this CARE CLGS panel discussion. Have a good evening, everyone. Good night.